Hey guys, it's Angela here and welcome to day 36 of 100 Days of Code. Today we've got a fun project for you. We're going to be building a stock news monitoring project. So I don't know how many of you guys trade stocks out there, but I've recently started learning about it. And one of the pictures that always come to my mind when I think of people trading stocks is something like this, where people sit in front of a million screens looking at all of the data and all of the news. Now, I did a bit of research into this, and it seems like a lot of the people who trade stocks professionally have access to what's called a Bloomberg terminal, which looks something like this, and it provides you with a number of things. The current stock prices of whichever companies you're looking at, and also the breaking news that's relevant to those companies. So depending on whether if they had some good news, say they earned a lot of money in the last quarter, or they built a really great product, or they developed a new vaccine, then obviously you can imagine the price of their company's stock go up or down depending on the type of news that comes out. And finally, these platforms also give you the ability to alert you when relevant pieces of news happen that are related to stocks that you're following. So I found out from my friend that to subscribe to one of these Bloomberg terminals, it costs something like $24,000 a year. So that was the end of that research. But I thought about it, and I thought about the kind of things that would be really useful to somebody who trades stocks. And I thought about how we could turn this into a Python project. So here's what's going to happen. We're going to DIY our own Bloomberg terminal, or at least the parts of the functionality that are quite useful. First, let's take a look at what stock market data looks like. So here I've got a website up called tradingview.com, and I'm looking at the large cap companies. So these are well-known companies that you've probably heard of, like Apple or Microsoft or Amazon. And let's say that we had an interest in a particular stock. Let's say that we bought shares in Tesla, and we want to know how it's doing. Well, we could take a closer look at it, and we could take a look at the full featured chart. And this shows us the price of the Tesla stock over the past few days. Now, I'm going to change the time zone here to the actual time zone of the exchange. And if I change the view to 1 day view, then you can see the points at which the market is open and when it's closed. So these blue sections highlight when the market is closed. Currently is the 22nd of July, so because this day's data is not yet complete, we're going to look at the previous day's data. So this is yesterday. And you can see that NASDAQ opens at 9:30 a.m. New York time, and it closes down at 4 p.m. on the same day. And often when you're getting data on stocks, you can get the price of a particular stock at the point when the market opens and when the market closes. For example, we could compare the price of the Tesla stock at market close yesterday. So that was about $1,567. And at market close the previous day, so that's 4 o'clock on the 20th of July, and that was at around $1,641. So there was a big difference between the end of the 20th of July and the end of the 21st of July. As a stock trader, we'd be quite interested in these big fluctuations because it might mean that we would want to buy more, or we might want to sell our stocks in Tesla. When you look at a lot of these services, be it Bloomberg terminals or something much simpler like this, they often give you a whole bunch of other data as well. One of the most useful things is actually to look at the news that's related to the company that you're investigating. So, for example, these are the current headlines for Tesla, and it comes from various news sources like Reuters or My Wall Street or Bloomberg. and it gives us some information to start analyzing. For example, well, why was there this big drop? What's the reason? And there's various news sources that might tell us why. For example, maybe they're experiencing problems with servicing staff, or maybe, as this news piece suggests, the stock is probably going to rise again. So these are really interesting things if we were to trade this particular stock. If we were to create a Python program that's going to help us trade stocks, then this is how it might work. First, we're going to pull in the stock prices of the stocks that we're interested in. So we would be using an API to get this data. And let's say that we were monitoring the Tesla stock because we bought some shares and we want to know how it's doing. Well, it might pull in the data for the price of Tesla stock that was at market close. Let's say that today was March the 11th. So we're pulling in yesterday's closing price, and let's just say, for example, it is $1,000. Now, the next thing our program is going to do is it's going to pull in the closing price on the previous day, and we're going to compare these two values. So over the course of one day, what was the difference? And in this case, there's a difference of $100 and the direction is up. So it increased in value, right? Going from March 9th to March 10th. So that's good news for us if we bought in. Now, we can also calculate what is the percentage that this rise represents. So if we look at this difference of $100 and calculate it as a percentage of yesterday's closing price, then we can see that the price on March 9th was 10% lower than on March 10th. So let's say that in our Python program, we set the program to run and fetch us some news whenever we get a slightly extraordinary rise or an extraordinary fall. So you can define that as anything you want, but let's say it's 10%. If there was a difference of 10% or more between yesterday's closing price and the previous day, then we want to know about it. So we're going to get our API to fetch us some relevant news. That way we can figure out what is the reason for this rise or what is the reason for this fall. And it might just turn out, well, because Tesla launched a new product or because they've acquired a new factory, some sort of indicator that says, well, this company is going to do a lot better. Now, once the stock prices have triggered this alert and we've fetched the news data, then we're going to send ourselves an SMS. So we're going to send ourselves a message telling us what was the big fluctuation that happened and what is the relevant news so that we can decide there and then whether we want to sell our stock or if we want to buy more. We're aiming for messages from Twilio that look a bit like this. That way, when you wake up in the morning and you're wondering, well, what's happening with my Tesla stock? And it just so happens that over the last 2 days, it experienced huge fluctuations, then you would get sent the relevant pieces of news to help you decide and help you figure out what you should do with your trades. That's the goal. And the best part of this project is the fact that it's going to be mostly up to you as to how you create it. In the course resources, I've got links to starting projects with comments and hints, and depending on which level of difficulty you want to choose, normal, hard, or extra hard, you can pick the starting project that's right for you. Once you've picked the starting project, then you're going to work through each of the comments and you're going to try and complete the functionality of this program. Now, I want you to spend at least half an hour to 45 minutes working on this project, just because it has quite a few APIs that you need to tap into. And most importantly, I want you to read through the API documentation yourself so that you can understand how to work with it and how to figure out things on your own. Because after all, there are millions of APIs out there. And if you're going to need it for a special project of your own, you're going to need to go through this process that all developers go through, which is digging through documentation and understanding how to work with an external piece of software or code. That's the challenge I've set for you. Head over to the course resources now and get the starting code so that you can get started working on the project. Good luck. Now I'm going to walk you through the solution. And I want to make sure that you've actually given this a go before you look through the solution, because you can watch me typing code all day long and it's still not going to get you where you want to be. So make sure you've actually practiced and you've struggled. Even if you get stuck, it's still better than just watching the videos and seeing the code written. You have to write code to get good at writing code. All right, enough motivation. Now I'm going to take the normal starting point to guide you through step by step. Now, notice how in the starting project, I've included a bunch of to-dos. And one of the nice things about PyCharm is you can view all of the to-dos found in the file. And you can delete them as you check them off, and then you'll be able to see what is remaining. And when you click on it, it takes you directly to that particular to-dos location, which is really neat. Let's start from the top. We want to be able to use the alphaadvantage.co's APIs in order to get yesterday's closing stock price. So that's the first thing. How do we do that? Well, AlphaAdvantage is a stock market API, and what we have to do is first set up an API key. You can select yourself as a student and then your organization if you have one, and then enter your email. Now, once you've filled in the form, you can click on Get a Free API Key, and you should see your API key show up below. Make sure that you copy this API key and save it in your project. So I'm going to head over here, and right at the top, I'm going to add my stock API key as a constant, like this. That way I won't forget it, because it's actually quite hard to navigate back to this page and get your API key. Now, the next step is, of course, to dig in through the documentation. Now, for those of you guys who chose the hard and extra hard versions, I didn't really point you towards which part of the API documentation is most relevant, because I hope that if you had chosen to give yourself a challenge, you would appreciate having the opportunity to dig through all the different things you can do with the API. Now, in our case, what we actually want is the daily data. So this API will return the daily data, which will give us the open price, the highest price of the day, the lowest price of the day, and also the closing price of the day, which is what we're mostly interested in. There's a couple of API parameters which are required: the function, which in this case is time series daily, and also the symbol, which is the name of the equity of your choice. In our case, we've already defined that at the top. It's the stock name right here. So let's see how we can fetch yesterday's closing stock price. To start, we of course need our trusty request module. And using requests, we're going to fetch from the stock endpoint. So you can see that in their example, the endpoint is everything up to and not including the question mark. This should be all pretty familiar to you, but you could also just type in simply the one that I've already included, this stock endpoint. Now, next, we're going to need to add some parameters. So let's create something called our stock params, and let's see what we need to add. So we have to add the function, which is equal to time series daily. I'm going to copy that so I don't make any typos. So let's create a Python dictionary, and this is going to be the key and value. Next, we have to add our symbol, and that is going to be the name of our stock or equity. The symbol in this case is simply going to be our stock name, TSLA. And stock symbols tend to have a maximum number of 4 letters, so that's why you see it abbreviated, like SNAP for Snapchat or TSLA for Tesla. Now, the final required parameter is our API key. The whole thing is not going to work unless we authenticate ourselves using the API key that we got just now, which is saved as our stock API key. Now that we've got all 3 parameters in there, well, we can add it to our request method, and we'll just add it as the stock params. Now, let's save this as the response, and let's print out what the response actually look like when it's in the format of a JSON. So let's run this code, and I'm getting an error that says indentation error unexpected indent, and that's because my stock params here really should actually be within the same indentation as the starting point like this. So be careful that when you have a to-do that's indented, every line that you start afterwards is going to be indented as well. So it probably helps to just unindent everything so that they will start at the margin here. So let's try that again. And this time it looks like we're getting back actual data in the format of a JSON. Let's view it using our JSON viewer. You can see that we've got some metadata, which basically just describes what we told the API. For example, we wanted the Tesla symbol and we wanted the daily price. But what we're actually interested is in the time series daily data. So you can see it's giving us the data for all of the dates prior to today. So currently it's 22nd of July. So we can see the complete data for the 21st of July and the 20th of July. Right now, what we're interested in is yesterday's closing stock price. So this is yesterday, and this is the closing stock price. So it's 1,568. How do we get hold of it? Well, we have to step through a number of keys in order to get to this particular value. First, we need to pass in our time series daily, and notice how this has brackets and everything. We have to include all of the spaces, all of the brackets in our key. Let's say that our data is equal to the response.json. Let's go ahead and add a square bracket, and then we can provide the key, which I'm actually just going to copy from down here so I don't make any typos. Make sure that I preserve all of the spaces and all of the symbols. So basically everything in between the quotation marks. Like this. Now, if we print our data, you can see it's stepped into that particular dictionary and it's now giving us all of this data. But this is not a list. As you can see, the data starts out with a curly bracket. In fact, it's a really big dictionary with the key being the date. Now, while I can tap into yesterday's data by simply providing this as the key, this is going to be pretty hard-coded because once I get to tomorrow, when it becomes the 23rd, then yesterday's date is going to change. So we have to figure out another way of getting hold of that first value. How about turning this large dictionary into a list where we get each of the pieces of data that's associated with each of the keys? To do that, we're going to need to do a bit of list comprehension. So I'm going to create a variable called data list, and then I'm going to use my list comprehension keyword. So we did list comprehensions a while back, but this might be a good time to remind yourself of how to use it. It's going to be new item for item in list. Our list is actually not a list, it's in fact a dictionary. So we're going to tap into our data, which is the dictionary, and we're going to call the items method on it. And this is going to give us not just the item, but the key and the value. So we're actually only interested in the values. So we can put that in here so that each item in this new list is composed of only the values and not the keys. Now, if I print this data list, you can see I've now got a list denoted by the square brackets, and each item in the list is a dictionary with each day's data. Using that, I can get hold of yesterday data by simply tapping to our data list and getting the object at index 0. Now, once I've got yesterday's data, then it's pretty simple to get yesterday's closing price, because that is simply stored under this particular key. Now again, notice how the entire key is this. It's everything in between the quotation marks, including the number and the dot and all of that. So this is a bit of a strange way of formatting your keys, to be honest. I haven't seen many APIs that do this because it's a little bit confusing to have spaces and dots and numbers, but that's just the way that they decided to do it. So in order to get the closing price, we can tap into yesterday's data, add a set of square brackets, pass in this particular key. So now if we print out yesterday's closing price, you can see we've narrowed down on the exact price of the Tesla stock at yesterday market close. That's to-do number 1 completed. So we can delete the to-do. Now, the next one is to get the day before yesterday's closing stock price. So now that we've actually got this data list, it's pretty simple to do that. Day before yesterday data is going to be equal to the data list at index 1, because remember, everything in the list is ordered going backwards from today's date. So that is going to be the day before yesterday's data. And then the day before yesterday's closing price, we can fetch that in the same way by passing in that key, for.space_close. And just to confirm everything works, let's print out both of the closing prices. So you can see that yesterday it closed at $1,568, and then the day before it closed at $1,643. So that's actually quite a big drop, almost $100. That's to-do number 2 done. We've managed to get the day before yesterday's closing stock price. To-do number 3 involves finding the positive difference between step 1 and 2. So yesterday's closing price and day before yesterday's closing price. And it gives us a hint. Now the hint takes us to the Python ABS function, which we've also seen before. It's a function that returns the absolute value of a number. So it basically just gets rid of any negative signs in front of a number. And this is what we need in order to complete to-do number 3. The difference is going to be yesterday's closing price subtract by the day before yesterday's closing price. Now, because these two are strings, if we actually run the code right now, you're going to get an error. And the error tells you that you can't subtract between a string and a string. We know that these numbers look like this, so we can quite easily convert them into floating point numbers just by wrapping the float function around them. If we print that out, you can see that it's actually going to be a negative number. And the reason is because this is yesterday's price, this is the day before yesterday's price. The price actually went down by $74. What if we want to get the positive difference between 1 and 2? Well, this is where the ABS or absolute value function comes in handy. If we wrap all of that around the absolute function, now if I run it, you can see we're getting a positive value instead. Now that's step 3 completed. We found the positive difference between yesterday's closing price and the day before yesterday's closing price. Now let's tackle step number 4. We want to be able to work out the percentage difference in price between the closing price yesterday and the closing price the day before yesterday. The diff percent is going to be the difference divided by the closing price yesterday. And in order to turn this into a percentage, we're going to have to multiply it by 100. But again, notice that this is a floating point number because it was calculated here, but this is still the string. So we're going to have to turn that into a float for this calculation to actually go through. And once it does, we're going to print it out. We've got about a 4.75% difference. Now we can tackle to-do number 5, which is if the percentage here is greater than 5, then we're going to print get news. This is pretty simple. All we have to do is check if the diff percent is greater than 5, in which case we're going to print get news. Now, depending on the time when you're completing this project, the stock price of Tesla may not show a difference that's greater than 5. Because in order to continue testing our code, we're going to need this to be true, then we can change this number to a smaller number just so that we can actually get it to work. So in my case, the difference is 4.75, so I'm actually just going to change this down to 4. And now if I run all of this, then you can see it's going to print get news. So that is what we're going to do on the next lesson in the second part of the solution. In the first part of the solution, we managed to get our code to pull in the live stock data for the selected stock name. And then we looked at the difference in price between yesterday and the day before yesterday, and then we worked out the percentage difference. Now we have this if statement, which will print get news if the percentage difference is greater than a specified amount. Now I've put 5 here just because ideally if you were monitoring a particular stock, you'd probably only be interested if it changed by a large amount, like 5 or 10 or 50% set by you. But at the moment, because we're testing these things and the Tesla stock is only moved by 1 point something percent, then this is actually never going to be true. So I'm going to manually adjust this down so that we can continue working with the rest of the challenge. So now on to step 2 of the challenge. The first part is instead of printing get news, we're going to use the news API to get articles related to the company name. The news API is newsapi.org, and we can start by getting hold of an API key. Once you've signed up, you should get a free API key, and we're going to paste that into our project. Now we can start looking through the documentation and seeing how we can use this news API. There's a number of endpoints, as we can see. There's top headlines and also everything. These are the 2 main endpoints. Now, everything is better for article discovery, whereas the headlines tend to only have a limited number of headlines. I've tested both of these and I found that the everything one is more likely to give us a news piece for stocks that we're looking for, because very often a lot of these companies and their stocks don't actually make it to the day's headlines. So this is what the query looks like. This is the endpoint and these are the parameters. Now, if we scroll down, we can see a number of request parameters. Q, which is the keyword or phrase to search for in the article title and body. Q in title is to search for in the title only. And then you can limit the sources or the domains which you want to search or exclude certain websites. And you can also specify the date, time, language, and a number of other things. Now, the only required parameter is actually this API key. Now, in addition, we're probably going to want to use one of these request parameters. There's a lot of stocks that get lumped into these analysis articles. So I think it'll be more specific if we can actually check the title of the article for our company name. So let's get started putting this API to use. Up here, we've already got the news endpoint. And we're going to delete this print statement. And we're going to use the request library to get hold of some data from that endpoint. And then we're going to add our params. Our news params is firstly going to contain our API key, and notice how it's spelt. When you're using parameters, you have to make sure that any capitalization or spelling must match their requirements exactly. So the API key is just going to be our news API key that we added previously. And then we're going to provide a query in title as well. And I'm actually just going to straight up copy it because I'm not sure if that was an I or an L. That way we don't make any typos. Now, the query we're going to search for is actually our company name, because while we can search for the name of the stock, it's actually better to search for the company name because most articles tend to include the company name rather than the stock name. This is going to be the params that's going to go in here. Now we're going to get hold of our response. And I'm going to print out the response as a JSON. If you take a look at the documentation, they also tell you what an example output would look like. Firstly, we have a dictionary with status, total results, but most importantly, articles, which is a list. In that list, there's a bunch of dictionaries which contains things like the source, the author, title, description, and each of these articles are an item in this list of articles. We can actually get hold of all the articles just by tapping into the news response.json and then passing in the key articles. And now when I print that out, you can see it's a list, first of all, and then each article is a dictionary inside that list. Now we've managed to complete to-do number 6, and we can move on to to-do number 7, which is to use the Python slice operator to create a list that contains the first 3 articles. And as a hint, I've linked to the Stack Overflow page where they go through the slice operator in quite a bit of detail, actually. If we want to only get the first 3 articles, then our start is probably going to be from the beginning, and then we're going to loop to stop -1. So that's going to be :3 because lists start counting from 0. Like that. And now if I print these 3 articles, you'll be able to see them if you click on this soft wrap, and you can see the 3 items: 1, 2, and 3. That's step 2. Now we've managed to use the news API to get hold of the first 3 articles that talk about this particular company name. In the next lesson, I'm going to go through the final part of the solution, which is step 3, and to figure out how to send the relevant parts of the articles to our mobile number. So previously, we managed to check the stock price difference between the day before yesterday and yesterday, and then based on when that difference is over a certain threshold, then we trigger this bunch of code which actually fetches some news from the news API regarding that company. So now that we've got the top 3 articles from the news API, now we're on to step 3, which is to use Twilio to send a message with each article's title and description to our phone number. The first step is to create a list of the first 3 articles' headline and description using list comprehension. So what we're aiming for is a single string that says something like this: headline, and then it's the actual article title. And then we've got our brief, which is going to go on a new line. And then this is going to be the article description. You can see those parts in the articles that we printed out. For example, this first article here, you can see the title says Spartan Energy surges after something, 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 something. You can see this is the first title and this is the first description. So it's basically the title of the article and also a brief description of what the article is about. That's what we want to get messaged to us. Now, in order to use list comprehension, we first use the keyword method. So new item for item in list. Now our list in this case is of course our 3 articles. And each of those items will be an article in themselves. And for each of those articles, we want to have this format. So I'm just going to cut that and then paste it in here. And then I'm going to use an F string in order to insert these relevant parts. So the article title is stored under the title key and the description is stored under the description key. So we can simply use that as the key to tap into this article. Notice how we've got a set of double quotes outside to create our string. If we have another set of double quotes to specify the key, this is going to be a bit confusing for the code interpreter. So let's change that to single quotes instead to make it actually work, like this. Now next is the article description. So this is going to go inside another set of quotes, and also it's going to go inside a set of square brackets like this. each of the new items that's going to go into this new list is going to be a string that's comprised of the article title and also the article description. Now we can save this new list into a formatted articles list like this. So that's to do 8 completed. And now we're going to try and send each article as a separate message via Twilio. Here's our Twilio SMS Python quick start, and we're basically going to replicate all of this. So first we're going to import the client class from the Twilio library and make sure that we actually have this installed if it's not already installed, and get rid of the red underlines. Next, we're going to get our account SID and auth token from Twilio. So I'm going to copy my account SID and put that over here. And also get my auth token from here as well. So now I can set up my client by creating it from the client class. Down here at the point where I want to send my message, I'm going to create a new client from the Twilio client class, and this is going to be comprised of my Twilio account SID and also my Twilio auth token. Finally, we can create our message and send it to our own number. The body of the message is going to be each of the articles. So in order to send 3 messages, we can loop through our 3 formatted articles like this, and then we can create a message and send each of those one by one. So the body is going to be each article in the formatted articles. Now the from number is going to be our Twilio virtual number, and our to number is going to be our actual phone number. Once we've done all of that, we can now test this and run it to see if it actually works. Now I'm going to go ahead and hit run, and hopefully our messages will get sent, as you can see right now. So we've got our headline and our brief, and each of the 3 articles are being sent as a separate message. That's pretty much the end of this challenge. Now you can of course improve this even further. And one of the things I thought about is having a little emoji to show whether if your stock is up or down, and also showing a rounded percentage. To do that, we need to figure out whether if the stock was up or down, and we can work that out by looking at the difference. If instead of using the ABS here, which is going to get rid of our negative and positive, if we had instead used an if statement to check if the difference is greater than 0, so it's positive, then we can create a variable called up-down, which starts out as none, but if it's positive, then we can turn that into a up emoji. And remember, emojis are simply just treated as strings in our code. Otherwise, if it's below 0, then we'll change that to a down emoji. Like this. And as always, you can always search for these emojis in Google and copy and paste them in if you don't have the emoji and symbols keyboard. But having taken away that absolute value function here, we're going to have to put it back somewhere else. So we're going to put it right here at the point where we do the if checking. And in addition, I want to change this diff percentage so that we actually round it to the nearest whole number. With the rounded diff percentage and also this up down, we can now format our message so that it says the name of the stock, and then whether if it's up or down, and then the difference percentage, and finally a percentage sign and also a new line. So now if I run this again, you can see that this time these messages come complete with the stock name, the movement percentage, the headlines, and the brief. So there you have it. I'm sure you can think of even more improvements to this program. And especially if you're somebody who actually trades stocks, then I'm sure you'll think of even more ways of improving this project. If you come up with anything interesting and fun, be sure to share it with the rest of us in the Q&A so that we can all admire your hard work.